Hello and welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Fine Disaster. This is Battlefield 4, and in today's weapon review, we're going to be taking a closer look at the AWS and MG4 light machine guns for the support class, with the aim of finding out which of these two guns is better, if there is at all any difference between them. As typical for a weapon duo, we're going to be starting off with the stats of both these guns. Starting off with the AWS, it has a standard LMG damage model with a maximum damage of 24.5 and a minimum damage of 18. Its rate of fire is respectable, relatively high actually for the LMG class at 780 rounds per minute. It's paired with a relatively unusual sized magazine at 101 or 100 plus 1 bullets in total. This magazine also reloads slightly faster than some of the other LMG magazines out there, with a short reload at 3.35 seconds and a long reload at 4.7, still not being close quarter capable, yet still better than most of the competition you will find in this weapon category. The recoil of the AWS is, given its fire rate, of course, relatively high, with a vertical pull of 0.35, a pull to the left at 0.25, and a pull to the right at 0.38. What especially is annoying about this gun is that it does have a relatively hefty horizontal recoil. That means certain attachments will, of course, be recommended, and it's a little bit more difficult to hit medium range targets already with this amount of horizontal recoil. But it is tameable with the right attachments, and we will get into that a little bit later in the video. What's good about the AWS though is its low first shot recoil multiplier. At 1.4, it means that this gun doesn't have that much more recoil on its first shot than it does on its average shot, making it relatively easy to control when tap firing, helping you extend the range of the AWS a little bit more over some of its competitors. The accuracy of the AWS is also unusual for an LMG. It's slightly more accurate at 0.25. Its base ADS is actually capable of keeping up with something like a bullpup assault rifle. However, when it comes to the rest of the ADS, while still slightly better than your average LMG, it's not going to keep up with any assault rifles, with a hip fire standing while moving at 5.5 and a ADS while moving at 1.5. The usual rules for LMGs apply to the AWS as well. Don't strafe while shooting, and never ever rely on hip fire with an LMG. It's going to get you killed. It keeps on getting me killed. It's never going to work. You may as well just not fire your gun at all if you think you have to hip fire it. And therefore, a AWS, while slightly more accurate than your average LMG, has the typical LMG accuracy traits. Moving on then to the bigger brother, the MG4. Same damage model here with a maximum damage of 24.5 and a minimum damage of 18. A slightly higher fire rate at 800 rounds per minute, coming with a significantly larger magazine at 200 rounds in total. This of course comes with a slightly longer reload time, a 6.2 second reload both for the short and the long reload. Typical for box magazines in Battlefield 4, the short and long reloads are identical here. Rico Patterns of the MG4 are very similar to the AWS, with a minimalistically higher vertical recoil at 0.37 degrees per shot, a minimalistically slower recoil to the left at 0.2 degrees per shot, and a slightly higher recoil of 0.4 degrees to the right per shot. Once more, however, this recoil is significantly disturbing when you're trying to hit longer range targets, and once more, similar to the AWS, you're going to have to be applying certain attachments to make this gun more usable at medium ranges. One key difference here to be noted, however, is the first shot recoil multiplier, which is quite a little bit higher than the AWS's at 1.85, comparing of course to the 1.4 of the AWS. The MG4 displays typical ADS accuracy values for an LMG, with an ADS value of 0.3 that is while standing and not moving, a hip fire value that is standing, moving, and hip firing simultaneously at 5.5, and an ADS while moving, that is basically shooting and strafing, of 2. You're going to want to apply the usual firing rules for the MG4, even more so than with the AWS. Aim down sight, stand still, otherwise don't use your weapon. With all that being said, then let's move on to the actual comparison. Where do these weapons differ, and where are they basically the same? Now, some of the differences between these two guns are noteworthy, others are simply irrelevant. One of the irrelevant ones will be, of course, the rate of fire. A difference of 20 rounds per minute is not going to kill anybody. The difference is not noticeable in combat. 780 rounds per minute is just as good as a fire rate as 800 rounds per minute. One of the differences that you may do notice though is the magazine size. Having 100 bullets versus having 200 is a difference. You're going to have to reload the AWS a lot more frequently than the MG4. On the other hand, your reload will be quicker. This, in my opinion, is more of a personal preference question. because of course a reload of 3.35 seconds is still not close quarter compatible, and therefore you cannot claim that the AWS is capable of reloading quickly in close quarter without any danger versus the MG4 being not. Both reloads are too long to be done in a dangerous situations. You're going to have to switch to your pistol, and therefore in my opinion there is no significant advantage here gained for the AWS by having a smaller magazine and a slightly quicker reload. For a matter of fact, I personally prefer the larger magazine of the MG4. Recoil wise, as far as I'm concerned, these guns are basically identical. Yes, there is small differences here and there, yet overall they behave the same. They require the same attachments. The only difference that I would like to point out is the first shot recoil multiplier, which is just higher on the MG4 and relegates its tap firing ability to a slightly worse place than that of the AWS. The ATS differences, the accuracy differences between these two weapons are once more irrelevant. I do not think they're noteworthy, and fractionally, therefore, don't really make a difference in these guns' performance. So which roles do you use which weapons for? In my opinion, the AWS is the slightly more flexible version of the MG4, but we are talking here about small differences. Because of the first shot recoil multiplier, it is slightly better at tap firing at distance. However, in my opinion, the AWS and MG4 are still not medium range kings. These guns are really only good at close quarter combat, and as we will get into in just a second, LMGs are not very well suited for close quarter combat. This of course coming from the fact that they are an exclusive to the support class, but we'll get into that in just a second. So the AWS is a slightly more flexible version of the MG4. On the other hand, the MG4 does have that nice bigger magazine, and frankly in the end it's going to be a personal preference question. Do you prefer to use the MG4 for the bigger magazine or the AWS because of its slightly more usable tap fire? It also depends on what map you're using this. Are you doing a weapon review and trying the guns out in different maps and game modes? Then you may want the AWS and something more flexible. Are you just trying to back rage people on locker? Well, the MG4 may be nicer with that bigger magazine, having to reload less frequently. Whenever tap fire doesn't become too important, the MG4 is the better choice. As soon as you have medium range engagements and tap fire is more important, the AWS is the more controllable variant of the two. But having forgone the conclusion there a little bit, let's talk about why these guns are not very good even at close quarter. It comes down to the fact that they are a support gun. Secondly, you cannot use these guns while strafing. Now, to put the first point, in fact, you do not have health, and being in close quarter combat means you regularly get damaged and you regularly need to heal up. This is not something like an LSAT where you can stand at the edge of the map and kind of just snipe in with your LMG and you hardly ever get hit. Being in close quarter means taking quite a bit of damage, and it means you need the opportunity to heal. However, in many Battlefield games, or if you're not playing with an active squad mate, you don't get the heals you need to get, which means you have to go out of combat, wait for the auto heal to kick in before re-entering. It makes you ineffective and at a significant disadvantage when comparing to an assault rifle player, which can heal himself at constant intervals. Furthermore, the fire rates are simply not as great as you would expect. 800 rounds per minute is fantastic, but the 3 close quarter assault rifles that your enemy is going to be using have 850 rounds per minute, 900 rounds, and 1000 rounds per minute, being of course the F2000, AEK, and FAMAS. They will outdamage you, frankly, having a very similar damage model. Therefore, you're at an advantage in that sense as well. And last but not least, having to actually strafe is important even in the closest of combat situations. Making yourself a harder target is important, and for extending the range of both close quarter assault rifles, close quarter LMGs, and close quarter PDWs, strafing is highly important, and you cannot do this with an AWS MG4 and LMG in general. You have to stand still, otherwise your shots are going to be going everywhere, and therefore it can be quite a bit of a struggle to actually go on a decent kill streak. These days with the AWS and MG4, they were of course nerfed in one of the big balance patches quite a while ago. This didn't used to be the case, but these days it is the case, and therefore I can't actually recommend you use either of these guns in almost any situation. Nevertheless, let's cover the attachments that are recommended for both the AWS and MG4. They are relatively similar. Starting off with the AWS optic, of course, of your choice. Accessory is a question of having a laser sight or not. Once more, it's dependent on your behavior and your ability to switch it off if you come into a smoky situation or not, in order to avoid it giving away your position. Battle attachment for me is going to usually be a compensator. We spoke about this, or we alluded to this, where covering already the weapon stats. It's got quite a bit of horizontal recoil, and this helps to control it. On the other hand, if you're going exclusive close quarter, trying to back rage on locker, you may want to slap a suppressor on instead. For the AWS, the underbarrel attachment is relatively clear for me. It's going to be a vertical grip. Helps me get this gun a little bit more accurate in case I accidentally strafe. It does happen. Frankly, there's no reason why not to slap on the vertical grip. Unless, of course, you are perfectly trained and never strafe while shooting. It's not such a difficulty for you to break that habit. Then you may want to actually just slap on an angle 4 grip just to help out with that little bit of first shot recoil. Moving on then to the MG4. Similar setup that we're going to be using here, of course. Once more, your optic of choice applies. Red dot sight recommended. Accessory laser sight. Once more, a question of your ability to turn it off if you're in close quarter situations or smoky situations, I should say. Barrel attachments, once more, compensator or suppressor, your choice. And last but not least, the underbarrel. In this case, I can see two different options. If you are going once more for the close quarter roll, vertical grip is just fine. If on the other hand, you're trying to extend the range of the MG4, you can actually make it just as usable as the AWS for tap firing by simply slapping on an angled foregrip, reducing that first shot recoil multiplier to below what the AWS has by default, making these guns even harder to keep apart, besides of course their magazines. Now with all that being said, I hope you enjoyed this weapon duo. Let me know down below in the comments which of the two guns you prefer. For me personally, it's just the MG4. I can't tell you exactly why these guns are so similar. It's hard to keep them apart, but frankly I prefer the MG4, probably for aesthetic reasons, possibly because of the larger magazine. Anyway, tell me about your experiences down below in the comments. Leave video suggestions if you have any. But with all that being said, I'd like to thank you very much for watching, and hope to see you in the next Battlefield 4 video.